Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pekoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. On the other end of the tin can and string is Arif and He is the editor-in-chief of Vikings Territory, also is a contributor to the Daily Norseman, and also writes for numerous blogs and numerous websites. Arif, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing fantastically well. And I wish that I didn't have to spend most of my day today glued to Twitter to find out the latest Minnesota Vikings news.
Well, it's not Friday, so that's a change. It's usually on Friday.
Yeah, no, this is and the Friday news dump is kind of notorious in all forms of media as far as here's the stuff that we really didn't want to talk about. Here's the firings we didn't want to really discuss with the media. No, this was a Thursday. It was a Thursday afternoon, and it literally inspired a podcast. We were going to be off this week, but Adrian had other plans. Before we talk about Adrian Peterson and his Twitter rant, we would first like to thank you for listening and thank you for donating in the past. We always appreciate hearing from our listeners, whether it's feedback or whether it's a donation to keep the lights on for us. We truly do appreciate the interaction that we get from you. You are more than welcome to visit NorseCodePodcast.com. There's a little donate button on the bottom. You can give us your tree fitty. Just like the Loch Ness Monster, all we really need is about tree fitty, just to keep the lights on, to keep the show ad free, so we're not sitting and talking about Audible subscriptions or anything like that. But thank you again for listening. We really do appreciate it. And on to the reason why we're here. Adrian Peterson.
Yeah.
So I have a theory.
You have a theory?
I have a theory. We'll be going over some of the tweets that Adrian had here in a sec, but this is how the show, or rather, this is how the Twitter rant came to me. He started off talking about how contracts are like one-sided or two-sided, and goes off on this big spiel about not honoring contracts and all this, leaving you thinking that he's talking about his own deal. This is a lot like if you're in a relationship with somebody who has a habit of starting stories or starting arguments in the middle of the story, like they completely missed the first part because that happened in their own head. So they start talking like, and you're sitting there on the couch just going, "Okay, I was paying attention, right? Like, I feel like I'm missing something." And then they get to see it like slowly, like more angry, and afterwards you're like, you stop them and go, wait, what are you talking about? You go, see, I didn't tell you the first part, which was like where this whole thing was headed. You weren't actually privy to that. And I feel like that's what happened in the Twitter rant thing, because he just goes nuts about his dislike of the union, and how they've handled some of the contract stuff for players, and then goes, "Oh, so what I was actually talking about was blah." Like, this was, I feel like I have experience with this, and I imagine some of our listeners do as well, that just all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, wait, stop. What the? Let's do a Zach Morris timeout here. What the hell are you talking about?"
So I wouldn't be surprised if he was actually having a conversation with someone, and then over the course of that conversation, he got worked up about this very thing. He was like, "You know what? Screw everybody. I'm going to tell everybody what I think." And then he tweets it out, and he doesn't realize that, like you said, they don't have the context of the conversation he was having, which I'm sure stemmed from a discussion about, his situation, but then expanded into a discussion about the nature of contracts overall. And then he just took that part of the discussion, added to it on Twitter, and then had to rewind. Yeah.
I was joking on Twitter that I thought that Ben Dogra was just sitting there with AP and going, "Hey AP, I have an idea. What's your Twitter password?" Let's let's make this interesting. I haven't been a horse's ass in at least 48 hours. Let's fix this.
No, I'm pretty sure Dogra would have just tweeted that all himself because he said it's his job to take all the flack that Peterson wasn't taking. So I'm sure he would have just been just fine doing it himself. Although I suspect that happened after a while, given sort of how the tenor and syntax of the tweets changed. It changed pretty definitively.
Yeah, as we're going, as we're starting off here, he goes, I love people who think they know it all. Shake my head, researching how many NFL teams hasn't honored a player's contract and learned something. Question for the people: is a contract two-sided or one? Arif, is a contract two-sided or one?
Well, the paper the contract's written on is one-sided, but it usually encompasses two parties, although it can encompass many parties. Sometimes people have contracts with themselves, too. Newt Gingrich had a contract with America, so it could have 300 million parties.
And let's not forget that some pieces of paper in these contracts actually say something along the lines of, this is a blank piece of paper, or this piece of paper is left intentionally blank. So, I mean, there's complications in this.
Yeah, I think in answering Adrian Peterson's question, we've sort of hit upon a snag, which I think it probably would have just ended the tweet rant right there if we had just pointed out gently that people can have contracts with themselves or contracts with all of America. I think that probably would have ended it.
So he goes on and says, okay, great, two-sided. Well, why, when one party decides, Mr. Blank, we want, that's not actually a contraction, you to take a pay cut now, or better yet, flat out release you? There's never no talk about honoring a contract.
So
ignoring obvious little things in there, he's basically upset about the idea that organizations can just drop a player because they won't take less money, right?
yeah, well, there's a couple of parts of this tweet that were interesting. The most important of which, of course, is that Chris Tomasin at the Pioneer Press decided that this tweet itself warranted its own story, wrote a story saying, hey, so according to this tweet, the Vikings asked Adrian Peterson to take a pay cut, which, no.
Swing and a miss.
Yeah, and I mean, so I initially read it as being about Greg Jennings, and it turns out that's in fact what it was about. And then Darren Wolfson also said it could have also been about Chad Greenway. But yeah, it's a little easy to read into individual tweets as part of a longer rant without thinking, hey, maybe he's just saying things. I think he might be just saying things. I also looked up one in an Old English dictionary. It turns out it wasn't ever a word. So
it was never actually a contraction?
Yeah.
That's a damn shame. Says, I know hundreds of players that wished their teams would have honored the contract, but instead got through to the side like the trash.
Like trash.
Like trash.
Yeah. Well, okay, so Peterson goes on throughout this rant and says, one side has much more power in these contracts than the others, and that players have needs too, and that those needs should allow them to sort of end the contract whenever they want and seek greener pastures, as it were, or I guess change of scenery, and that's an issue because. It means that, from a fairness perspective, that contracts are structured in a way that is designed to diminish the power of the player, which is why we have holdouts, right? Which is why we have Revis-style holdouts to get more money, because when the money is no longer guaranteed, the team can do whatever they want to a player. To some extent, I think it overstates the team's power. Because before the threat of a holdout, the teams either have to pay the amount in the contract or cut the player. If the player is too good to cut, then the team doesn't actually have that much power, even if they are overpaying a player. But for the most part, I think I think that's correct. I think if we want to talk about sort of the whole thing with regards to contracts, um, I think that in the context of sports and in the context of the unique skill sets and the unique risks incurred by athletes, that it is sort of, I'm not going to say entirely, but it is sort of ridiculous that football players are the only have the least amount of money in their contracts guaranteed out of all the major sports. Um, and they're the ones that incur the most risk. I guess hockey fans probably have a pretty legitimate argument otherwise, but I think given the nature of football, you can say that they incur a lot of risk, and for baseball contracts or NBA contracts to have significantly more, nearly all of their contracts guaranteed, uh, it is a little unusual, and so teams have freedom of movement basically, but labor does not. And I think that there's an interesting point to be made there. It is intuitively sort of not fair, but our conception of what is or is not fair should be extended out into sort of everything that's being negotiated into the CBA, which includes the fact that if a player is injured, teams not only have to pay out sort of an injury fee, which ameliorates some of the, not much, but actually, in fact, very little, some of the issues, the guaranteed contracts, but also players who've played for a certain amount of time are eligible for, employment benefits and retirement benefits. And there's a lot of supplemental programs that the NFL has started that players can take advantage of that don't exist in other sports. NFL players have somewhat unique-ish opportunities for endorsement deals and so on. And there's like a lot of things in the CBA. And so to evaluate one part of the CBA or one part of a player contract and see two parties and see that two parties have different amounts of power in the contract, I think ignores some of that, but I'm not going to say that that automatically makes it fair. And I think a lot of people are conflating in this discussion what is fair and what is, expected. I think it makes sense from the context of negotiations that the NFL is the only sport that, or I shouldn't say the only sport, the sport that has the least amount of guarantees and contracts. I think that makes sense because the players have the least amount of power because there aren't other leagues that they can go to. There aren't, alternative employment mechanisms for them. For every other sport, there's another thing you can do. It's not as desirable, except, maybe in the NHL it could be desirable to play in a Russian league. Who knows? But it's not as desirable to play for another league, but it's still a thing you can do. You can always play in China or Turkey or Italy. If you play basketball, you can play in Japan or even elsewhere if you play baseball. But you can't play anywhere else in the NFL, which means you don't have any power in these negotiations against people who do not view the NFL as their primary source of income. And so they don't have, that as much to lose. And so from the context of negotiations, it makes sense that the contracts are not, evenly sort of dispersed in terms of the responsibilities and duties and guarantees. That doesn't necessarily make it fair. It just makes it make sense. I think whenever you have a power structure like that, I think the outcome of a negotiation is always going to be, quote unquote, unfair. And it is a little weird to say, hey, these multi-million-dollar players aren't, getting a fair shake. But I think that the amounts don't matter when you talk about fairness. I think the amount of risk that's incurred by these players sort of exceeds that. I think the unique skill set of these players exceeds that. There's always that graphic that people pass around about the number of high school players that end up getting recruited by a Division I team, the number of Division I players that end up starting, the number of Division I players that start that end up getting invited or considered for the draft, the number of those players that are considered for the draft, entering the draft, and then the number of those players that actually play in the NFL. It's like, a percent of a percent of a percent of a percent. And it ends up being like not just less than 1%, but like less than 0.1% of players who play high school football versus the players who end up playing in the NFL. And so, yeah, there's a very unique skill set which demands a high price. And within that skill set, there's also an enormous amount of risk that most other industries have. And so I wouldn't say we should color the fairness discussions with the amount of money that players make. But I do think that people who complain about this probably should be aware of that. I think Adrian Peterson has been treated a little bit better than most players in the NFL. And it's not like he's this practice squad player that's been jerked around, put off and on the practice squad, and barely makes $80,000 to $100,000 a year for a 3-year career with no transferable job skills. I mean, those are the players that have the biggest issues. The players who are represented by the fact that the average NFL player only plays for 3.5 years. Those players are the ones that are getting the most screwed by the lack of guaranteed money, the lack of injury protections, and so on. So
Yeah.
So
This really did feel like something that would be like a Chris Cluey tweet. And that's not to say anything negative about Chris Cluey, but this felt like something that would be coming from like a Chris Cluey, where he'd be talking about contracts, or he'd be talking about the union and how they should stick up for blah. It really felt like the problem with this whole thing was the person who was delivering it. Like, he seemed like the most inappropriate person to be talking about how unfair the union is and how we need to change these rules. Like, the messenger was the problem here.
right, and I think there's not really much more. The messenger and the timing, I think, because Peterson is currently locked in a stare down with the Vikings. I don't think it's just that he wants to be wants to have guaranteed money. I still think he does want to force a trade. I think Judd Zulgad covered that in the Purple podcast over at 1500 ESPN, that Peterson can say it's about wanting guaranteed money because if he fails to force a trade, he doesn't have to deal with the fact that he said he wants a trade, that he doesn't want to play for the team anymore. Like, if you're forced to play for the team, you don't want it on record that you don't want to play for the team, even though functionally Peterson has been saying that all offseason. So I still think he wants a trade, but I think that in this situation, he just wants it out there that he wants more guaranteed money, because that's sort of the easiest way to explain why he's holding out. But yeah, I think I think the timing of it's a big problem. I mean, a lot of people are just done with him because it turns out most people don't like it when you beat a child. And even if people do not have an opinion about the moral stance of how Adrian Peterson disciplined his child, they have a lot of problems with how Adrian Peterson has treated the team, how Adrian Peterson is demanding more in a situation where he's the one that caused the team to do without him for the entire season. It's kind of weird that Adrian Peterson thinks he's in a position of strength, at least perceptively, to demand more, not less.
I'd still like the tweet that he had put out, or not that Adrian had put out, but a tweet that may have been sarcastic. Somebody going, "This is it. I'm burning my Adrian Peterson jersey. I'll send video." Like, really? This was the thing. Really, white man? This was the thing that got you. This was the thing that put it over the edge. Him hitting his kids with a switch and literally beating them bloody. That wasn't enough. But god damn it, he's trying to stick it to the billionaires out there, and I cannot abide this any longer. It was totally fine to sit in the closet when he was just beating kids, but when he's trying to stick it to the billionaire owners, man, I cannot. This will not stand, man. This aggression,
fight, buddy.
This aggression will not stand.
Some people were tweeting that their issue with Peterson's rant is that Peterson has still, I guess, not thanked the fans that have supported him for their support. Which, yeah, okay. That makes sense. He's put those fans through a lot. And they've taken sort of a lot of abuse in supporting him from their friends. Basically who they've professed their support for him to. But I don't know if that rant is where I'd be looking for it. And I'm sure he's thanked his fans before.
At some point, yeah. In fact, he had a tweet even thanking the NFL Network for ranking him in the top 100 players for next year.
That was weird. That was like a
Very.
weird place for that, especially because he re-clarified his rant later, and so now it's just in the middle of a bunch of stuff about labor politics.
Yeah, so it's labor, labor, contract, contract. Thanks, NFL Network, for ranking me in the top 100. Clarification about rant. This is not about the Vikings. Just frustrated that our union didn't get guaranteed contracts for its players. Like, it comes across as a bit ADD. Like, we're talking, let's go ride bikes. Like, it really felt off. Or it was one of those, oh, crap, totally forgot. This was actually the whole reason why I went on Twitter. Thank you, NFL Network, for putting me in the top 100 players for next year.
It's like you walk into your room and you're looking for socks and you notice that something is off, and so you fix that, and then you end up like fixing half your room and then wondering why you walked into the room, and then you walk out and then you walk back in, you realize you wanted socks. You get the socks and you walk out the door.
Like, oh, crap, that's right, that thing with the stuff. I was going to do that. So congrats, Adrian Peterson. You caused us to have a show. You caused us to break this down. I guess let's just jump into the mailbag here, because the first two questions we have are about this situation. First question that I have is from VA_Norseman26, which is, why do people care when millionaires renegotiate contracts with billionaires? Boredom?
Well, because we're stakeholders, because we're fans of property owned by billionaires, and that property has entities that negotiate with employees who are paid millions of dollars, and those employees are the people that we watch. I mean, the outcome of these negotiations determines who we watch playing in our favorite laundry every year. So we care. And then also, for some reason, like when we care about a thing, we'll also expand our willingness to talk about ancillary things that we don't actually care about. So, for example, this thing, like we care about the fairness of contracts negotiated in sports because we care about sports. We very rarely care as much about contracts or even just labor agreements in like sweatshops. Like that's just not something that we think about or care about because we don't cheer for our favorite seamstress. Like, so, you know,
or in the case of FIFA, we don't usually care about who ends up having the dealership or the sponsorship of certain players and their teams. Like, we really don't care.
It's true.
Nike may have given $150 million to something. We don't really care. We're not cheering for Nike. We're cheering for the player.
So yeah,
you're cheering for Nike, aren't you?
Well, I mean, I'm not Darren Ravel.
Dude.
Yeah, no, I think I think we don't really care about the specific numbers Adrian Peterson receives for a Nike endorsement, but we do care if he loses that endorsement because it is ancillary evidence. It's like tertiary evidence about sort of his status overall, and his status overall impacts, whether or not a team is willing to trade him, whether or not he has the ability to play, whether or not the public perception is such that he could be under, a harsher punishment that would take him away from fans. So that's why we care. I mean, we don't care about other billionaire negotiations, right? Like, we don't care about how hedge fund managers are negotiating sort of their contracts with, AIG or whatever. I mean, we suddenly care when the economy tanks, but, we don't kind of care in general.
That's not something that's just built into our DNA.
Right. So yeah, that's your answer. We care because we care.
We have a vested interest in what we're seeing. Yeah, it totally makes sense. The next question, however, is from Judd Zuglin's hoodie, and I'm glad Judd Zuglin's hoodie is still able to type after this day. Judd Zuglin's hoodie asks, how is it possible this AP situation can end positively?
I'm not sure.
I have a theory. I have an idea as to how this can end positively. I think the best way for this to end positively is for Adrian Peterson to come on our podcast to do his first official interview since the contract negotiation problems happen, and you can sit here and we can get, I don't know if we can get Dusty. I think he's gonna probably be gone that day, or he's going to be sick from mixing Dayquil and NyQuil or something. But I think that we can get him, maybe Chad Greenway on the line too, and we can figure this thing out.
I think it's just unlikely that these things end positively, right? I think it's certainly possible that it ends positively, but we're just going to end up with sort of just a lot of pain along the way. So I guess it's like childbirth.
And a lot of lockouts are like that, though. Like, lockouts are kind of designed to be annoying and painful, and just, can this please just be over? Can we just both agree? You know you're not going to leave. You know you're going to pretend to retire or something. We know that's not going to happen. Just, can we just get this over with? And it's almost like the player is doing that to the fans to give pressure to the owners. It almost feels like that.
Yeah, and I mean, if you take a look at sort of the best contract negotiator of all time, Darrelle Revis, it was just that constantly where things ended positively. It was just a lot of pain along the way, and he ended up earning just insane amounts of money. And the Jets ultimately ended up with fantastic returns, aside from the year that Darrelle Revis played for the Patriots last year. But for the most part, there was a lot of good coming from like his infinite lockouts or holdouts, because they got to keep him year after year after year and probably pay him what he's worth, to be honest, because he's so critical to the way that their scheme ran way back when. And then they got to flip him for like a first and fifth or something along those lines. It was just sort of after that where he played for the Patriots. That was just sort of like an unexpected, kind of rare-ish outcome. But then they got him back. So they've had Darrelle Revis. They've had to pay him a lot of money. But I doubt the money that they paid him prevented them from securing people that they needed to have in order to win. That was their own drafting fault. Like, they could have just drafted a better quarterback, and that would have solved that issue. So it is possible to end positively. Darrelle Revis is another case of that. I think it will probably end positively for fans, because I think I know I'm contradicting what I said earlier, but I didn't realize that if you trade Adrian Peterson, that could be a positive outcome too. The only way it ends negatively is if the Vikings call Peterson's bluff and he turns out he's not bluffing and he retires. That's the least positive outcome. I don't know if that's likely. I think that's not likely.
No, that doesn't seem likely, considering the things that he has said in the past, and what he said publicly, and what his dipshit agent has said publicly. Really don't I don't foresee that being an actual issue, but it is worth bringing up. And holdouts like this are designed to be annoying. That's just how it goes.
Right.
Next question is from Tommy the Gun 13, who asks, what are the top position battles heading into training camp? We can almost expand this and talk about OTAs if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. I mean, not much has happened at OTAs, but the top position battle is being featured sort of in a lot of discussions about OTAs. The top position battle is for starting guard. That doesn't necessarily mean starting left guard, because it turns out that if the Vikings like TJ Clemmings enough to start him, which is supposed to be a first-round pick, kind of makes sense, then they would start him at right guard in all likelihood and have Brandon Fusco on the left side to play left guard. And that would mean that instead of having our position battle be left guard, it would be right guard, because then Clemmings would be competing with David Yankee, with not Brandon Fusco, David Yankee, Joe Berger, possibly Michael Harris, Austin Shepard, and so on. So that's the position battle I think most people are paying attention to, and rightly so, because if the Vikings have a stable and good offensive line, then their offense is in real contention, given how Teddy Bridgewater finished the season. And I don't think Teddy Bridgewater's going to start this season how he finished last season. I think it's too much to expect him to play like that, because he was playing basically as a top 5 quarterback in the last 5 games of the season. And you can't expect him to play like that again in his second year. I think he could threaten to be a top 10 quarterback. He'll probably be a top half, maybe like top 16 quarterback. And if he's that, And if the offensive line holds, given all of the potential, I'm not going to say talent, but potential that we have at wide receiver, there's going to be a lot of yards and a lot of points, and that'll be fun to watch. So it's really important that that this one guard position gets resolved. I find it surprising that T.J. Clemmings could play right guard, and that Brandon Fusco be moved to the left. I detailed this in the comment section of the Daily Norseman. And then also it led me to write a series of articles about how likely it is that a better left guard could help Matt Khalil. And it turns out Mike Zimmer doesn't actually think moving Brandon Fusco is specifically designed to help Matt Khalil, but more to get T.J. Clemmings on the field in a position he's comfortable with. So that makes more sense to me than the other one. But I did say I don't think it makes sense to move Brandon Fusco there in order to get TJ Clemmings on the field, even if he is the best possible answer at guard, because I want TJ Clemmings to replace Matt Khalil at left tackle in the long run, if Matt Khalil doesn't improve. If he does improve, which I think is less likely than so, then TJ Clemmings is a long-term replacement for Phil Loadholt, or Phil Loadholt becomes like a trade chip, whatever, right? You have three very good tackles on the team then. And so for me, I think that means you want to play TJ Clemmings at left guard in order to teach him the footwork he needs immediately so that he can play. Brandon Fusco, I had thought that he had never played left guard in his career. It turns out he played a little bit of it in college, but he played center for like 3.5, or not 3.5, for a long time in college, and he played right guard before that. He must have played left guard sort of in spot duty. And in high school, he actually played right tackle. So him playing on the left side, I thought was going to be completely new to him. It's not. It's still relatively new to him, given sort of the preponderance of play that he's had on the right side. And I think that you're more likely to screw something up by moving him to the left side than you are if you move T.J. Clemmings to the right or left, because I think T.J. Clemmings has a lot to learn. He has so much to learn in order to play guard, or in order to start at offensive on the offensive line. He has so much to learn that I think weight distribution and balance and footwork on the left or the right side would just be folded into what he has to learn, because he has to learn new footwork anyway. Not just because he's in a new scheme, and not just because he's relatively new to football, but because he has to coordinate his feet and his hands, which is one of the problems that he had, coming out, because that is sort of related to him being new at football. But if he didn't have a step on people, he wasn't able to drive people down the field. So you see a bunch of TJ Clemmings highlights where he just destroys people. He blocks two people on the same play. He's able to block downfield, that sort of stuff. If he doesn't have a step on someone, he loses. And so he needs to improve his footwork in big ways in order to coordinate with his hands, in order to fit the scheme, and in order to just improve in general as a player. And because of that, I don't think he has muscle memory patterns set. I don't think you have to unteach him anything. Whereas with Brandon Fusco, I think you do. So I'm still kind of surprised that this is the move. I guess I'm against it, but whatever. It's not that big a deal. But I think that you're just more likely to screw something up by moving Brandon Fusco over and having Clemmings at right guard than the other way around, and having Brandon Fusco play right guard and Clemmings on the left. They did mention that Fusco is now their most athletic interior lineman, which is another reason they might want him on the left. That's their thing. The Vikings play with left side, right side designations, and that really bothers me because I don't think it's necessarily very smart football. They do that on the defensive side too, and I think that given the way football is played, things are a lot more symmetrical now, and teams can attack on either side. And so I don't think you put a different skill set on the left or the right. But whatever. Other position battles to watch, I would say split end. I think Mike Wallace has the flanker position locked down. I want to see what comes of the split end battle, probably between Charles Johnson and Cordero Patterson. I don't think it is a lock that Johnson will start there, but it is his spot to lose. I think another position battle to pay attention to is what happens at left cornerback. It's not a lock that Trey Wayne starts there. Most first-year or rookie cornerbacks, even in the first round, don't start. Although by the end of the season they often do. I think Kyle Fuller was the only one who started the opening game. And then Jason Verrett worked himself in. Justin Gilbert never did. A bunch of first-round cornerbacks may start by the end of the year, but at the beginning of the year, that often doesn't happen. So at left cornerback, I wouldn't be surprised to see Terrence Newman there, possibly, Josh Robinson. So that's another position battle I would watch to see if Trey Waynes wins that battle. If he doesn't, I wouldn't read into it too much. Like I said, most first-round cornerbacks don't necessarily start. Then on the defensive side of the ball, linebacker, whatever happens with will linebacker and middle linebacker, Kendricks has to move up from the second team because he was taking second team reps at OTAs, and claim that spot. Presumably he'll win that spot, but it is possible they move him to outside linebacker early, in which case you'll have a battle between Chad Greenway and, I don't know, Adi Cole at middle linebacker. So I'd watch that. And then the biggest position battle to watch, I think, on the defense is probably strong safety. You want to figure out who's going to win that spot. Sendejo basically had that spot at the end of the year. Blanton had the spot at the beginning of the year, and the Vikings went out of their way to mention Anton Exum as someone they're excited about who could win the spot. They did grab Anthony Harris as an undrafted free agent. I don't think he has the chance of winning the spot, but I do think he has the possibility of getting onto the roster. I think the punt return battle will be interesting because it will define whether or not Marcus Sherrill stays on the team. If Stephon Diggs can win it, I think that's probably the end of Marcus Sherrill's, who's had a great career, I think, here. And then, just basic other stuff. I think the right defensive end spot will be interesting. I think Brian Robinson has it for another year, but it'll be interesting to see if, Scott Crichton ends up taking more snaps. Spielman went out of his way to mention it on K-Fan, that Scott Crichton has been really explosive and someone that they're really excited by. So I think that's another thing to watch. And that's it. Oh, and if Adrian Peterson, retires or sits out or gets traded, it'll be interesting to see how many snaps Jerick McKinnon gets. But that's a bit much.
That's kind of in the this has to happen plus this has to happen plus this. Yeah. I was going to mention you'd brought up Cordero Patterson. There had been talk about improvements with him over the winter. Have you seen anything that is of note, or anything that you feel he's picked up over the past couple months?
Nothing that I've been able to personally observe. I think smart speculation by Krauser. He comments often at the Daily Norseman. He's also Krauserific on Twitter. I don't know if that's because it's his name or because he really likes Paul Krause or something. But he had mentioned that if Patterson is as physical in route running as he is as a someone after the ball, that he could win the starting spot. Or he and I both talked about it, but he mentioned that one of the things to look out for is that who he was training with in California, not the mystery mentor that the Vikings still don't want to release the name of. Could be Troy Brown, who knows. Basically the mentor from hell. I think Ben Gessling reported on it for ESPN. If that sort of conditioning, it's evidently very intense conditioning. A lot of athletes try to go through it. Most of them drop out. So I think it's to Patterson's credit that he didn't. If that workout translates on the field, it probably means that he ends up being a more physical player, both at the release and as a route runner. And if that's the case, then he could win the starting spot, and I think he could do really, really well because his biggest problem, I think, was that physicality as a route runner off the release and at the catch point. And if he learns physicality at those 3 points, which is historically not something that people think that you can teach, and I think those people are right. I think that's not just a thing that you gain over time that much. I mean, I don't think you can turn into Steve Smith, right? I think you just are or you're not. And so if he's one of the few that has the ability to do that, I think he turns from a goat, like a scapegoat, into a phenomenal receiver, sort of worth investment in fantasy, worth investment in terms of buying jerseys as a fan, worth investment from the Vikings in terms of a second contract and so on. He'll be very good if he just learns that.
He'll be worth the hype that he had last offseason as a fantasy pick for sure.
Yeah, I think so. He still has to learn basic route running, but yeah, I think for sure.
Logan, at Chinnable has a good question for us. Says, what's scarier, 2015 Alshon Jeffrey and Kevin White, or 2014 Alshon and Brandon Marshall?
I think it's a really good question. Um, I'm actually kind of surprised that the Bears went wide receiver because I'm really high on Marquez Wilson, who is also like enormous, like 6'5", 230 pounds. But I think, assuming sort of a healthy Brandon Marshall and a healthy Alshon Jeffrey, I would say 2014 Alshon Jeffrey and Brandon Marshall, but I would say 2016 Alshon Jeffrey and Kevin White are better than either, right? So yeah, I think this year Kevin White's someone to watch out for, but I don't think he'll have a Mike Evans type season. Um, but yeah, I think it's a good question. But I think 2016 we'll have to watch out.
Yeah, and plus we have to remember who's throwing to Alshon and Kevin White too.
Who is throwing to? Is it still Jay Cutler?
It is still Jay Cutler.
Fantastic.
That's exactly it. It's like, oh, well, Alshon and Brandon Marshall did pretty well in 2014, but they still had Jay Cutler throwing to them. So using the law of Jay Cutler's diminishing returns, I don't feel as if 2015 Alshon and 2015 Kevin White are really in that great of a position to start. I feel like it's kind of hard to grade that sort of thing as it goes down. But it's definitely an interesting question because 2014 Alshon when healthy and 2014 Brandon Marshall when healthy were quite the combination. Let's go to the difficult question of the mailbag. This one comes from Racer Craft, who says, in Zimmer's defensive scheme, rank the importance of each position 1 through 12, independent of current personnel. Basically, who is the most important and least important player on the defense in Mike Zimmer's defensive scheme?
Well, in Mike Zimmer's ideal world. Well, I think there's a problem. But I think there's a problem with the question, which is to say independent of the talent that he has, it makes it impossible to evaluate because, like any coach, he does adjust sort of the way the scheme operates based on the talent that he has, which is not a contradiction from some of the earlier stuff I've said about how just drafting the best talent and then adjusting your scheme to that talent is not an ideal strategy. I think that in terms of the importance of individual players, that gets tweaked by the talent that he has to fit sort of the tendencies of the scheme, which is not to say the scheme doesn't have a stable like structure or skeleton to work off of independent of the talent. It's just very difficult to find out what that is based off of his history in like Dallas, Atlanta, Cincinnati, and Minnesota. I saw this question and I knew that you were going to make me answer it. So I scribbled a quick list that I don't necessarily believe in. Because it's very difficult to evaluate because he's always emphasized the talent that he has. I think maybe the most important player in the scheme is the 3-technique defensive tackle, which is interesting because the 3-technique defensive tackle will take fewer snaps than like the cornerbacks or the safeties. But I think that person is most important in terms of putting pressure on the quarterback, not as important in stopping the run the way that position is played. But is incredibly important in terms of putting pressure on the quarterback in a way that the defensive ends are not, especially in Mike Zimmer's scheme. I think after that, this is really difficult. After that, Mike Zimmer says that the most important thing for the defense to do is to stop the run, but I think that the individual players who are most important do the best job at stopping the pass. So after that, it's probably the left cornerback because the quarterback is slightly more likely to throw it to the left than the right. And teams tend to put, if they've got a multi-dimensional cornerback, they tend to put their better cornerback on the left. That's not happening with the Vikings because Xavier Rhodes is the right cornerback, and that again things change. But then after that is the right cornerback, and then after that's the free safety, because in order to run the schemes that they do, the cover 1 type stuff, sometimes cover 3, and a lot of the pattern matching stuff, the free safety has to have a lot of range and a lot of stuff pivots off of him in the defense, and so he has to read really quickly, and sometimes he'll call out coverage adjustments. So those three players, and then you've got a bunch of run stoppers. I think the left defensive end is the next most important. He's both a run stopper and a pass rusher, which makes him relatively unique in the scheme. Again, relatively. And so they'll be primarily responsible for all of the production that happens on the line that isn't the three technique. After that, I would say probably strong side linebacker, and then weak side linebacker. That is an estimation. It could be the other way around. I say strong side linebacker because of the importance Anthony Barr had last year, but if you take a look at the way the strong side linebacker was used in Cincinnati, that was less so, especially when James Harrison was on the team. He was primarily a pass rusher. He didn't drop into coverage as much. And then, I don't know, they've sort of switched who they have at strong side linebacker, but, there was more investment at weak side linebacker, but the better players always seemed to be at strong side linebacker until very recently. After that, like I said, weak side linebacker, and again, it could flip. That person is the primary tackler in terms of run stuffing, and that person should, rack up the most tackles because they don't have blockers in front of them. And so, there's that. Then after that, you've got the right defensive end, who's primarily a run stuffer. Again, not something I agree with in terms of the way scheme should be designed. But I mean, that is how it's designed in Mike Zimmer's scheme. After that, I'd say the strong safety, which would put the strong safety at number 9. That could change if you've got safeties who are versatile enough to switch around, but I think the free safety is just more important. I think the strong safety serves as another person in the box to stop the run. And then 3 players who are very, very rotational. The nose tackle, who's extremely important when he's on the field, but is very often off the field. Takes up 2 blockers, changes the blocking math, what have you, for the run game. Then the middle linebacker, and then the nickel cornerback. And I say the nickel cornerback's last, even though NFL teams had a nickel package 60% of the time last year, and a base 4-3 or 3-4 package like 40-ish% of the time, a little less than that. In part because Mike Zimmer does not want to be a nickel, but puts the team in nickel when he knows that that's a better situation. And the weakness of the linebacking core forced the Vikings to be a nickel much more often. I think Mike Zimmer wants 3 athletic linebackers that have the ability to cover the range of the field so that it can be more closer to 50-50. And that's the only reason I put the middle linebacker above the nickel quarterback. So that's the completely arbitrary, I could be totally wrong ranking. I don't know that this is a thing that Mike Zimmer engages in terms of thinking about the importance of his players, because again, talent is varied.
Did you get all that? Good, because we're gonna have a test on that next week. So we can move on to something a little more lighthearted. Kyle KJ Segal asks Miracle Whip or mayonnaise? Arif, Miracle Whip or mayonnaise?
Mayonnaise, but I do not hate Miracle Whip like most people who answer mayonnaise.
I don't care for either, really. But if I have to have one of them on or in something I'm eating, I prefer mayonnaise. Miracle Whip is not something I enjoy, but I don't enjoy mayo. I think the only time I actually enjoy mayo is the red pepper white sauce here, but that's it.
Mayonnaise is awesome, but it doesn't necessarily. I think it's an okay condiment, but I think it is phenomenal at doing other stuff, like acting sort of as a binder in crab cakes, producing really good sauces like that red pepper sauce you were talking about, or aiolis. I think mayonnaise is amazing, but as a condiment that is unflavored or whatever, I think it is just merely pretty good or okay.
See, and my problem is when I end up ordering a burger, or I end up ordering a Wendy's spicy chicken sandwich, I end up having to order it without mayo. And I ended up ordering it without mayo because they just slather the hell out of that. It's somewhere along the lines, America was like, we want more mayo on our sandwich. We want more mayo than sandwich on here. Just as much as humanly possible. When I bite into this, if I can just ruin my shirt with all the globs of white, disgusting fat just rolling down and like ruining and just making you work harder for laundry. Like maybe this was all just a big plot from Big Laundry or something, but I can't. Oh, it's just disgusting, and especially when they forget.
Well, okay.
You're like, oh, you ordered it without mayo.
Let's
Well,
put
that
on
means
just a jug of mayo
you're
on it.
extra mayo on this. And then you're sitting there in the car and you're trying to scrape it off of the bun, or like trying to use the lettuce as a way of getting the mayo off. Like, can anybody understand my plight here? Like, it's not necessarily an allergy. I just really don't like biting into like 3 inches worth of mayo in order to have a spicy chicken sandwich. It's not okay.
Yeah, no, that's terrible. I agree with you. I hate that. Um, I can't order it without mayo though, because very often the bread will get soggy without a layer of fat. But yeah, I would prefer a little less on my sandwiches than some fast food places give you. It's weird because at McDonald's, it's like the one thing they don't seem to standardize across franchises. Everything else is standardized, but at some McDonald's you get like an appropriate amount of mayo, and at other McDonald's you just get way too much.
Now, there needs to be standardization, damn it. I feel like Obama should put this into the last 2 years of his term should be spent getting the mayo situation organized.
You should
So
petition at whitehouse.org.
we should petition that, or I should petition that, since I'm the one who actually cares about it, and you're just humoring me. Um, that laugh is the sound of Arif not disagreeing with me.
No comment.
Awesome. No comment. So, last episode, I had mentioned an incident that had happened a few years ago involving me about breaking my leg, destroying my knee, and ending up in a wheelchair for a few months. And there had been a couple requests to actually hear what the hell happened. So I'm just going to take a moment here before the last question and just tell the story of how I ended up in the situation that I did. So it was a few years ago, and the girlfriend was turning 31 and was very upset about that. So what did I do as the good new boyfriend? I decided to take her out sledding.
Oh my god.
It was February. It was February, middle of February, and we both went out. I didn't tell her that this is what we were doing, but I had a couple friends out there of hers too, and they brought some liquor and they brought some hot chocolate, and I believe a couple of them even combined the two. It was
Right.
fantastic.
As you do.
So we're in Grand Forks, and we're out at the corner of 13th and Belmont, which is dike country. After the flood, they built these huge.
Oh right. Yeah.
dikes. So they tore up the golf course and put up these big dikes, and we went to the top. And I'm not a small guy. I was heavier and bigger then. But in real life, I'm 6'5", and at the time I was closer to about 410 pounds. I'm less now, but that's what I was at. And I was we were going down the hill. It was fine. Everybody brought somebody brought a toboggan and little saucers and shit. It was great. Well, I'm walking along the top of the dike, and we figure everybody's got like one more run in them. We're all pretty much done. But I realize I have to go to the bathroom, and I'm trying to figure out
What?
hold on, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to accomplish this on top of the dike. And I decide that I need to walk along the top of the dike for a little bit to slide closer down to the car so I could leave. And as I was walking, I slipped, and I managed to have a massive ankle sprain, or severe ankle sprain, and a severe knee sprain on the same leg, on my left leg. And I dropped. I didn't slide down, but I just dropped. And my first thought was, I wonder if the bone is sticking out. Like like I fell, and there's there's two things that a fat guy is very acutely aware of. It's that you have to make sure the chair you're sitting in is not going to break when you sit down in it, and the second is I've fallen. I wonder if and my weight fell on it. I wonder if I broke it. So that so that's what happened. I proceeded to ended up tearing part of my meniscus in my knee. I had a severe ankle sprain and a severe knee sprain, and I dropped. But here's the thing: they won't airlift you to the hospital from on top of a dike.
Like, what do you mean? Like, that's a rule?
Oh, they're not going to do that.
Okay.
I have to get into a vehicle and make it over to the hospital. So they're trying to figure out what to do.
Wait, so did you call and then your friends were like, hey, you should airlift him, and they were like, no, definitively not. We will not airlift this person.
No, the discussion was never had.
Okay.
Because we were all too busy trying to figure out how to get the fat guy down the hill. So instead, what we ended up doing was we grabbed one of those long toboggans, like those long plastic toboggans, and we somehow got me into it. I'm still not entirely sure how. I proceeded to hold onto my like pant leg to get my leg like kind of hanging up, because at this point I realized I hadn't broken anything, but my whole leg was numb. So I'm holding up my pant leg, and my buddy slides down behind me, digging his heels into the snow the whole time to slow it down. But he was sliding on his butt the whole way down the hill. So that had to be an amazing sight to witness that. But then when we get me down there, we have to drag the toboggan over to the car, and I was not very useful in helping move that because I was in a lot of pain.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I ended up getting dragged over, and we ended up getting me to the hospital, and I ended up in a wheelchair for the first little bit anyway, because crutches were not working with me. It was a very, very difficult process to not be on 2 feet when you're 6.5 feet tall. It's very difficult, and physical therapy just sucked for it. But that is the story of how James nearly broke his leg and was convinced that he had a bone sticking out of it from walking across a dike. Now here's the thing. This happened on the girlfriend's birthday. This has been brought up every year since. It's in one of those like you'll never live it down thing, like, oh god, I did this last night, I'll never live it down. No. I ruined a birthday she didn't want to celebrate to begin with. Like, it's almost funny now, and as a bit of a joke, I ended up putting, like last year or the year before, I ended up posting the pictures that we took from that day, but you'll notice through the pictures that there is no picture after like a certain time, because that's when the bad crap happened. That's when someone ended up going to the hospital. That's when people stopped being polite and started acting real. Like it was unpleasant, I think, is the best way to describe the next 4, 5, 6 months with that. So that is the story of how I ended up nearly destroying my leg and nearly destroying my relationship in the process.
It just goes to show you that forays into nostalgia are bad.
Yeah.
No more
like,
BuzzFeed for you.
No more BuzzFeed for me. Which, yeah. We have one last question, and that's from Soren Hansen 2, who asks, what mascot would LA, Las Vegas, and London teams choose? I feel like Las Vegas should have a should choose, like, do like some sort of tie-in with the Archer TV show. I feel like Archer would be a great
Really?
mascot for Las Vegas. Maybe the picture for the logo could be Archer with the name like Cyril Figgis on the placard for the mugshot. I feel like that on a uniform would be amazing. I would buy 5 jerseys of the Las Vegas Figgises.
I'm not an accountant. I'm a field agent now.
El Contador.
It was Las Vegas, L.A., and London.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. I think there is a Las Vegas team called the Gamblers. I believe they're a football team. So they can't take that, but that would be a really good nod to the fact that the NFL doesn't want a team in Las Vegas specifically because of gambling.
The XFL had the Las Vegas Outlaws.
That would be good, I think, but maybe they don't want to.
Would you have to? Would you have to pay Vince McMahon for the rights to that?
I don't think you would have to. I think that maybe they don't want that associated. They don't want to like acknowledge that the XFL ever existed, and that might accidentally do that. Oh, the Las Vegas Gamblers are an Australian league football team in the United States. What? Wow, we have an Australian football league. There are 37 men's teams and 13 women's teams. I don't think it's a league. I'm just gonna put that out there.
So it's a lot like the unicycle football league in Texas.
Maybe, sure, why not?
So also that is a thing. The unicycle football league is in fact a thing. It is a thing in Austin. Gee, I'm shocked.
Yeah.
But it is a thing in Texas.
Great. Yeah. So they could...
London has to be either the Werewolves or the Calling, right? Like
no, that would be way too cool. I don't think it would be that because it's too cool. I would.
It has to be something terrible like Bobcats.
Oh god, it would be Bobcats or Stags. The London Stags. No, I think they'd try to, if they created a London team, they'd want to like have a shout out to NFL Europe, so they would choose the Monarchs. Would not be against the London Silly Nannies. But I think it'd probably be the Monarchs. As for LA, it would have to obviously be a new team, otherwise they would choose the Raiders. And I can't think of a good name for an LA team. Something stupid like Stars.
God. That.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a fan vote. The fan votes have produced interesting team names. There's some like confusing ones, like the Titans. Like that was kind of a dumb fan vote name in my opinion. But then there have been some good ones, like the Ravens. Like that was a really good. Homage to Edgar Allan Poe. Like that's a really good one. There are some neutral ones. I think the Texans were a fan vote name, but I think for the most part you can probably get a good fan vote. It's probably going to be better than the Stars. So,
you had mentioned fan submissions. Are you aware of the UND nickname search that's going on?
Oh my gosh, they have some of the most amazing submissions.
The paper ended up putting out the full list of the accepted nicknames that they're whittling down and the rejected nicknames, and some of the rejected ones are just amazing. The moderate Muslims I thought was interesting. I thought like the University of North Dakota moderate Muslims.
I think me and Andrew Kramer from 1500 ESPN, we're making fun of some of the nicknames that came up. I can't remember any of them off the top of my head. We'll link them in the show notes. But there were just some good ones.
Yeah, although the thing that people were upset about is one of the better ones that was rejected was the Abominable Snowmen. And that actually, like, I would like to see an Abominable Snowman Gophers hockey game. I think that would be okay in my book.
Yeah, that would be fine. I'd be okay with that. They may have spelled Abominable Snowman wrong, In which case,
because this nickname search is also about grammar and spelling. That is, your mom told you this was going to count somewhere, and it does. Although the University of North Dakota Canadians is still one of my favorites.
that one's good.
Like I had one that I'd been throwing around for years because people knew I was from Grand Forks and knew that the nickname had still been like national news as to they were going to have to reject it eventually. And so for the longest time I was saying that UND needed to be the University of North Dakota Genocidal White Settlers, and along with having the Trail of Tears marching band, like that whole thing. And no, it just didn't end up catching on. It wasn't even in the rejected pile though. So I was a little sad.
There's some good ones. Deadspin just or not just, but Deadspin has some of their favorites. So there's Ice Dragons, which is not terrible or anything like that. But my favorites are Saltine Crackers, because mild, white, and underwhelming is a name that aptly embodies the culture of the university. There's the Pussies, because UND caved to the NCAA, which is not true. The North Dakota legislature did.
Yes.
So to punish UND for that is, well, not surprising that you screwed that up. There's A-holes from Grand Forks. That's a rejected nickname because, people from UND are... I am an NDSU alum, and I have always called UND folks that. So that was that submission. There's, oh my God, there's 7th Cavalry in honor of George General Custer.
Yep. That's still terrible. After witnessing the Grand Forks nightlife, especially in the middle of winter, middle of January or December, I would push for the University of North Dakota Fighting Liquor Penguins. Now, I say liquor penguins because if you've ever seen one of these women or one of these drunk guys leaving a bar at 2 a.m. in downtown Grand Forks in the middle of February when there's a nice new sheet of ice and they're in heels, they are they walk, they do the penguin walk, the very, very small steps, and they are clearly not dressed for the occasion if they fall. And just little waddle, and trying to make it back to their habitat. And and living in North Dakota, you just subsist on liquor. Like that just becomes part of your everyday occurrence. So I was pushing for the Fighting Liquor Penguins, and I feel like we would have a shot at the next Hobie Baker if we were the University of North Dakota Liquor Penguins.
Let's see, University of North Dakota Dick Suckers, because they suck so much dick. It's well thought out.
I mean, there's logic to it.
Right. I mean, it's, A to B to C. Let's see, there's the Crop Dusters, which would be interesting.
That's funny for two reasons.
Let's see, the Fighting North Dakotans, because that's how we talk. That's the explanation, because that's how we talk. The cum dumpsters, because most people on campus openly get cum dumped in and or on them.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Anyway, that's part of the culture of UND.
I worked at UND for 5 years. I feel like that would have happened at some point.
Oh my God, drones, because we train pilots.
Yeah.
Oh, for people who don't know, North Dakota has a very, very active and actually one of the country's best aerospace programs. So a lot of these are based on that. But I think drones is hilarious because we train pilots.
And not just nationally, like internationally as well. China just sends people. China just sends people to UND and just like, here, learn how to fly. We're paying all of it.
Yeah.
Here's one for the University of Minnesota folk. Handshake line punchers.
Oh.
That was one of the crazier hockey fights I'd ever seen. That was really it was really one of the best. Like it's not up there with goalie fights because goalie fights are something entirely different. When a goalie fight happens, it's like seeing two unicorns meet. Just like that's not supposed to happen. Oh, gloves are off. We're set. Somebody get the cameras. We're good. Handshake line punchers. Ouch. All right, I feel like we're running out of.
Not until we cover
things.
the fighting Tom Hanks reason to get Tom Hanks here.
Yes, that's exactly. All right, I know what I'm supporting now.
By the way, approximately 50% of these submissions are the fighting Sue.
Yes, that's kind of inevitable. That and Flickertail because that's what UND used to be before the Fighting Sioux, and Flickertail is like the one thing that everyone can agree upon should not be the new nickname.
It's a game I played in elementary school in North Dakota. I think it is only called Flickertail in North Dakota.
Yeah, it's not called flag football in North Dakota. It's called Flickertail because we have problems, as evidenced by this week. So, this has been an interesting and very special edition of Norse Code. Once again, you can follow us on Twitter at NorseCodeDN. You can follow Arif at Arif Hassan NFL. You can follow Dusty at Dusty O'Connell. And you can follow myself also at Big Mono, although I do most of the stuff on the Norse Code Twitter feed. Yay! If you'd like to donate to the show, if you'd like to support the show, if you'd like to send us an email, you can get to us at norsecodepodcast.com. And we promise to include the download link in the future postings of the show for those of you who want to download the show instead of just stream it. You can listen to us on iTunes. You can go to the Daily Norseman website. You can go to norsecodepodcast.com in order to hear our new shows. And you can donate at the bottom of the page. And if you'd like, and I'm still trying to convince people this is a great idea, if you'd like Chad Greenway to appear on the show, you can tweet him at ChadGreenway52.
Oh, yeah. Be sure to do that, because that would be actually awesome.
That would be the greatest and last show we ever do.
Because you can't top that.
So if you want the show to end, what you need to do is convince Chad Greenway that he needs to be on an episode of Norse Code. That's fantastic. So for Arif and myself, my name is James. Thank you again for listening. And our formula is this: Adrian Peterson, the wrong person at the wrong time to say the possible right thing. See you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.